Yo, happy Tuesday, everybody. This is going to be a fun conversation talking about cross-chain products. I think this actually might be our first or maybe second spaces ever where we've had a fellow interoperability protocol featured on the show, man. Adam, how was your weekend? Did you watch the Super Bowl? Were you fangirling?
What a great game, man. And I know you were bummed out your Niners blew it there, but you know, it's hard to beat maybe the GOAT. You know, it's really tough. So I felt bad for you, but I love seeing the Niners lose. I used to watch the Niners win all in the 80s and 90s, and it was nice to see them go down. Not gonna lie.
Well, I'm actually a Broncos fan, but I had to cheer for the Niners because the whole team is just Broncos players or Broncos legacy. The worst part at the end was John Elway walking up the Super Bowl trophy for the Chiefs in the Raiders Stadium. Like you literally can't get worse than that,
what
dude.
What kind of craziness is this?
That was a stab to the heart there. I had to go home immediately after that. I'm excited, man. We actually have our fellow friend Tam, who's the VP of Marketing, has joined us on the live stream if you guys are watching. So he's going to be sitting here talking with us. We're all talking through my microphone. If you guys aren't familiar, we do a simultaneous live stream and audio spaces at the same time. So some people get confused. There's 3 people talking through my account. It's probably going to trip a little bit of people out here. But first and foremost, let's make a little bit of rounds, and then we'll get off to the conversation. Chris, man, how was your weekend?
Good morning. Good morning. Pretty good weekend. Crazy game. Obviously out here in Vegas with you, Jake. So the city was just pretty much on fire. It was a ton of madness everywhere you looked. One of the biggest weekends we've ever had in the city's history. So super cool. Excited for today. You know, we've been following Wanchain for a long time. A little bit of nostalgia, and it's good to see them, you know, still building. They were pretty early in the interoperability mindset, and so excited to see how much progress they've made.
Yeah, I am as well. Wanchain, you guys have been around for a while, but first and foremost, I'd like to introduce the homie Tem, man, thank you for joining us. So excited for this conversation. How you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good. I didn't watch the big game, but I did tune into the Devils taking down the Seattle Kraken. So I was watching something else.
The biggest, yeah, the Super Bowl was actually the most watched program in television history. So that was kind of interesting. Yeah, Chris and I live out here in Vegas. That's where the Super Bowl was. The city was on fire. Ubers were incredibly expensive.
Yeah, well, you had all the Tay fans tuning in to boost those numbers.
Yeah. The airport, the VIP airport of private jets was actually full, max capacity. Donald Trump had to go park somewhere else from where I had read. Tem, dude, give us a breakdown of what is Wanchain, when was it founded, and what is like the main objectives of Wanchain and its cross-chain objectives?
Sure, yeah. Well, Wanchain, some of you might have heard of it. We're pretty early on in the interoperability game. But we are nowadays, really more of an R&D project. We're focused on, a lot of kind of building this type of infrastructure to allow different blockchains to connect to one another, communicate, pass data. But yeah, we launched, all the way back in 2017 officially. The roots probably stretch a little bit further back than that, probably late 2016. But yeah, we've been at it for a long time. We've lived through a couple bear cycles, so there's not many projects out there that can say that they've lived through multiple. But yeah, we are actually the original cross-chain bridge. We launched our first mainnet bridge all the way back in 2018. This was just between the Wanchain L1 and Ethereum, and since then, it's really just exploded. We connect almost 35 different networks now, EVM, non-EVMs, all sorts of fun stuff that I'll be happy to get into.
Yeah, we do that as well. I can hear your echo of the phone in the background.
Yeah, I can hear the phone. Bro. I told you the phone.
I put it in a drawer. If you give me 1 second, I'll put it even farther.
Yeah, I'd throw it in the other room, maybe.
I'll put it in the other room.
We'll talk. Adam, it's actually interesting, right? So Emblem Vault was founded in 2016 as well, around the same time as Wanchain. They obviously hit mainnet about 3 years maybe beforehand. I think they had an ICO back in 2017. But even just thinking about interoperability back in 2016, that's like a year, maybe a year into Ethereum even being created in smart contracts.
Yeah,
look how far this space has come.
I mean, it's really pretty visionary to be that early because, we're all siloed now, right? And to have the wherewithal to stick through it all these years, to kind of still see that vision. Which, Tam, I'd like your opinion on it, but it still feels like, obviously we on this space, we get it. We understand the larger idea of interoperability between blockchains. But I think for the average user, other than maybe transferring, some, crypto around, which can be a pain, with bridges, we still haven't seen like this great use case of interoperability that we kind of, all of us know in our guts going to happen, whether it's gaming or just like movement of assets around and like this invisible layer, which we talk about all the time at Emblem. Like, where do you feel we are now as a space on like this grander vision? But where do you feel like we are now in that kind of that road?
Yeah, well, my phone is now outside, so hopefully you don't hear it anymore. But yeah, it's kind of interesting that you point out, like, us that are in the space, we might see it more clearly. But sometimes I feel like people who aren't, really in it, focused on it every day, maybe think that it's closer than it actually is. There's still a lot of work to be done. Still very early. I think at least the different projects in the industry, we have the same general idea of what interoperability should be able to do. You mentioned passing assets around, but also just kind of arbitrary data. Ultimately, I think we want to be able to call smart contracts, from one chain to another with minimal off-chain components. So at least the good news is we all kind of agree that once that exists, it'll be a very powerful tool. And then, we can really kind of see blockchain take off in the mainstream. The bad news, I guess, is that it's still pretty early in the process. Most projects now can move an asset from one chain to another. Not going to look too deeply into how they're actually doing it, but they can do it. Projects do that, and we're getting better as an industry of moving arbitrary data. even kind of triggering smart contract functions, but with a lot of a lot of components in place to help that along. It's not, this one beautiful seamless system yet.
Yeah. One beautiful, decentralized, completely trusted system. How do you guys look at that? I mean, that's obviously like the big one. There's the, decentralized maxis, which we'd all love to be, but we recognize you bump up against reality. How do you view that as you guys as a project? How do you view that and weigh the pluses, minuses, and balancing all that sort of stuff?
Sure. Yeah. Like the way we approach it is you need a bit of nuance. But what we move away from is the design itself decentralized. There's a difference between how something is built and designed, and you can see it, the rails are in place to let it scale, versus some projects will put in like a totally centralized component, which they'll be like, oh, we'll just replace it and build a solution later on and fix this problem. So our approach has really been more, okay, we're going to take our time. We don't always build fast, but we do always try to maximize decentralization as much as possible. I'll give you one example. Our kind of cross-chain infrastructure, the blockchain nodes, that are the off-chain component, they are permissionless and decentralized, so anyone can go and become a bridge node. Now, in practice, at any given time, there's 25 active bridge nodes. If we're thinking the long-term vision, you probably want 25,000. But at least the design of the system itself, can scale to 25,000, so that, we've proven the capability of doing it. And then as it grows, you actually have that path, versus like an approach, which would be, well, we need this, this bridge node group. So in the meantime, we're going to use like a centralized entity. So we don't take that approach. We do try to really focus on decentralized design.
So I have here pulled up the Wanchain cross bridge types. So there's 3 different ones, and then even more so, Adam and I, Chris, we talk a lot about these various types of interoperability mechanisms, right? Like a wrap is kind of like this custody and mint, right? Like for WBTC, for this type of asset, you send Bitcoin to BitGo, they custody Bitcoin, and then they give you a token that represents that value. There's what you got, the space that you guys are in, which is bridges, which there's 3 mechanisms that you guys have implemented here: token bridges, Xflow bridges, and NFT bridges. I'm sure there's even more types of bridges than that. And then Emblem Vault does this like encrypted mint is what we call it, where you're basically tokenizing the private keys to a wallet and trading that as a token on the other side. Let's go through all 3 of these so that we could get a full understanding of how over the last 6 years, Wanchain has gone through your R&D phase to figure out what is the best method of implementation. So here for token bridges, it says token bridges uses the lock, mint, burn, unlock mechanism. Can you explain what that means in practice?
Yeah, this is probably the type of bridge that most regular users are going to be familiar with. This is where you have the native asset. It could be anything. It could be BTC on Bitcoin. It could be ETH on Ethereum. It could be USDT on Avalanche. It's something where there is this original asset, the quote unquote real version, and you lock it into a smart contract on that first blockchain. You have the mechanism. We can go into the details, but basically the decentralized bridge nodes go and confirm everything, and then they mint a wrap version of the contract, so a mirrored version of it. So you have the original value locked on the original chain where the asset actually exists, and then once that's locked, you mint kind of like a ghost or a mirrored version of it that the person can then use, on whatever chain they want, assuming there's smart contracts. There are a bit of nuance there, but for the most part, and especially with EVM chains, it's as simple as that. And then if you want to go in the other direction, the user has that mirrored version, they burn it. And then once it's confirmed that the burn has occurred, then the original asset on the original chain gets unlocked and returned to the user. So simple as that. That's kind of the earliest type of bridging.
Yeah, there and it continues to grow. There's like lock and mint. I think there's burn and mint that happens, which I think this is what Decods is doing with their partnership with Wormhole. And they all have different types of preferences, especially once you get into this idea of value. One of the main ethos with Emblem Vault is that you never want to destroy the token because of the provenance, and that is a very especially for things like high-end art and collectibles and historical value, you would never want to destroy that token. But in things, as Adam talks about a lot, like things in gaming, it doesn't really matter what the token provenance is, because you just need it. You need these quick transactions and different types of things.
Mhm.
So as you guys first began then with token bridges and you'd say V1 of a bridge, looks like you've implemented your own type of bridge called Xflows, where it says Xflows is a decentralized cross-chain solution that enables native-to-native cross-chain transformations for assets that exist natively on multiple chains. What the hell does that mean?
Well, I'll just take one second to pause. I wouldn't frame it as like V1 of a bridge and V2 of a bridge. It really just depends on the use case. The original version, the lock, mint, burn, and lock, it still has its places. Sometimes you need this type of approach. If you want to bring your BTC value to another chain, that's the only way you're going to do it. Now, the Xflows. So for people like you guys who really know this basically uses liquidity pools. The major difference is how those liquidity pools are funded. So, historically, there's a few ways. One, a project can incentivize users, whether it's like a reward token or something like that. Just go stake your USDT on these different chains, and then we'll pay you a bit of money for that. And then once you have these pools, you can just, lock USDT in one pool, unlock the USDT in another pool on a different chain. There you go. Another way would be centralized provision liquidity, which is also, something that can be done. For us, the liquidity provision mechanism is slightly different. It actually ends up using the V1 bridge, the token bridge, to source liquidity. So, if you're doing this lock and mint version, users are minting these wrapped assets on a particular chain because there's something they want to do there. You might want to go to the Wanchain L1, for example, and there you want to do some yield farming or some lending with your BTC value. So you have this, existing, motivation to go lock your BTC on Bitcoin, and then, play with your wrapped asset and generate value for yourself. But just kind of consequently, you now have a liquidity pool of BTC on Bitcoin. So with all these, hundreds of different assets coming into all these different chains that are resulting in wrapped assets, you just have all these liquidity pools that are sitting there locked securely in these smart contracts. So what Xflows does for, a few blue chip assets, this will be like USDT, USDC, BTC, and ETH that we support right now on about a dozen chains. It already has these liquidity pools that are there organically, provided by end users, and then rebalances them when a different user wants to do like USDC from Avalanche to BNB chain, for example.
And this interacts with native Bitcoin or only wrapped versions of Bitcoin?
Only native and a few, popular synthetics, let's call them. So for Bitcoin, it'll be obviously BTC only exists on Bitcoin, but in Binance Smart Chain, you'll have like Binance backed BTC. So we treat those as equivalent. Another one is, BTC.B on Avalanche. We treat that as native equivalent. So BTC is a special case like that, but with ETH, we'll treat Ethereum, ETH and Ethereum, as well as the various L2s as kind of native equivalent. So you can go do L2 to L2 bridging that way. And then USDC is a little simpler because Tether and Circle just mint that thing everywhere.
Yeah, when you're interacting with cross-chain protocols, you realize how simplistic it can be when you're interacting with smart contract platforms across different chains. But trying to interact with UTXO based assets or the DAG assets or things that are not smart contracts, you got to be real creative. And that's kind of where Emblem Vault was born, is taking Bitcoin assets, NFTs specifically, to different chains. You have to have this mechanism of trading the private key or go about it in a different way. And this gets to the last component here, where it says NFT bridges, right? This was kind of the latecomer. I believe the first NFT bridge came around 2020, 2021. I think Emblem may have been first to the scene or around that time. How is Wanchain going about moving NFTs across chain?
Yeah, so the NFT bridges right now, we support just like a handful of collections. The mechanism itself most closely resembles the token bridges, the lock, mint, burn, and lock. So it doesn't burn an NFT, the real NFT, and remint it or anything like that in this standard mechanism. The user just locks the original NFT on the source chain. It's likely to be an EVM chain in this bridge type. And then the bridge mints a mirrored version of it, and it copies all the attributes that the NFT has, and it also continues to monitor the original NFT. In some instances, some NFTs may have their attributes update from time to time depending on what it's used for, and so all this gets reflected on the destination chain as well. So this mirrored version will maintain all of the same attributes. Here, the different collections do have to be integrated, kind of ad hoc before they can be crossed to the bridge. So it's a little more involved than like an ERC20 token or something like that, where it's just a copy paste. But yeah, the mechanism is like that. You lock it, you get a wrap version that inherits all the same attributes. And then when you want to go the other way, the wrap version gets burnt, and then you get the original one back.
Yeah, that seems to be the novel approach here. Again, right, the whole idea of provenance for an NFT, you'd never want to destroy that unless there's a very specific use case. Going down the front page, you guys have integrated about 30, so I think it's about 35 different platforms right here. All these different networks between Bitcoin. There's some other ones I haven't heard: Moon River, Phantom, Moonbeam, Gather, essential, etc. down the board. How is Wanchain going about adopting and integrating these different type of protocols? Is it as simple as, hey, go to your Discord and open up a support ticket, say I want it added? Or because you guys are such a heavy R&D company, are there multiple degrees of variables that need to be satisfied to plug in the Wanchain system?
Yeah, that's a good question. At this stage of the project, EVM chains are pretty easy to do. So if you are someone who, even if you're not the EVM chain team itself and you want to bridge to a particular EVM, we'll essentially always just say yes. It doesn't take too much of a lift on our side, assuming that it's a standard EVM chain. What we kind of do more internally when we prioritize different chains to integrate without the kind of request from the user, it's really to support like the different products. So like Xflows right now, that's definitely our most popular product. And this is really, really powerful for things like, the various Ethereum L2s. So as L2s are popping off and there's, new ones, doing well, exploding. So these are likely to be EVM chains that we'll just identify on our own and then, bridge to them so that the kind of Xflows product itself can continue to expand and get more powerful. Besides that, kind of driven from the R&D side, it's really more the non-EVMs that we've been looking at. So we most recently bridged to, in terms of non-EVMs, I bridged to Cardano. So we did this kind of hand in hand with the entities that form Cardano. And so this is UTXO model. It does have smart contracts, but it's a totally different language. So, this type of stuff really aligns with, our vision, because we don't really want a vision, this vague meta network that we talked about at the top where everything is seamlessly connected. We don't want that to only be EVMs. That's not the vision we want. We want lots of different types of networks that maybe can even serve, very specific use cases, but still have that interoperability layer. So we focus a lot on bridging to these, to these non-EVMs as well. So if you look at that list, there's a large handful of non-EVMs included there. And then for really, really small chains, this is something that we've been kind of received more and more requests from lately. When you have an interconnected system like this, where all the chains are directly connected to one another, like is in our case, it's not like one of those bridges where there's an intermediary chain behind the scenes, that everything is kind of routing through. The connections are direct. So there is a risk, that if one of these chains that the system is connected to has some sort of security issue or, any malfeasance on the layer 1 level, this can impact the whole network, since it is, one giant network. So with very, very small chains, maybe that only have a small handful of nodes that are running it, we do have kind of a more tailored solution that uses our cross-chain message passing platform. And then, so in this case, we can help them. The cross-chain component, they'll still benefit from the security of, that secures all of Wanchain's products, but the project team themselves will own like the smart contracts and things like that. So if anything does go wrong, it's limited to their subroots.
Oh man, there's 3 different conversations I can see from there. Between integrating UTXO models, because that's also one of the main challenges that Emblem faces and tackles. That's really the frontier of innovation, and cross-chain compatibility. Security is another conversation where a lot of people get goosebumps when they hear bridges, because they just think of the multi-billion dollars of hacks that happened during the last run. And I forgot what the last one was, honestly.
Probably cross-chain messaging, probably.
Oh, cross-chain messaging. Let's start there, because that actually seems to be the hot narrative in the cross-chain world. You see like Layer 0 doing a token airdrop. They've blown up, and one of their key metrics is always like cross-chain messaging. I think Wormhole also advertises the same thing, as 2 of those are the leaders in this kind of area. Can you define what cross-chain messaging even means, and then how does Wanchain separate itself from its competitors with its cross-chain messaging protocol?
Yeah, that's definitely become a hot topic, and I personally really like a lot of what Layer 0 has done, for this side of the industry. To put it really simply for people who are listening and watching, all cross-chain transactions are cross-chain messaging in a way. The message is just a piece of data that, in bridging parlance, we just want to have on one chain and then /move it to the destination chain unadulterated, so that it's the same, quote unquote, the same data on both chains. And, when we talk about token bridges, that's where we all kind of got started. There's messages involved there too. It's just like a particular data structure that results in a token. So with cross-chain messaging, is just a little bit more arbitrary. You can kind of just move any type of data you want, essentially, with a few confines in terms of like the size and things like that. But basically, you can move any type of data you want, and then you just have smart contracts in most cases waiting there, looking for that specific type of data. And once it receives that specific type of data, then it triggers an event in the smart contract. So you can leverage it like Layer 0 and Wormhole do to do token cross-chain transfers if you want. But what's fun about it is that you can really trigger just about any on-chain logic you want once you receive this message. So Wanchain, our approach to it is like a lot of our approaches to our products, is that we really always have kind of the long-term industry standards in mind. Now, as you said at the top, we're far away from having true industry standards, but that is where we want to get to ultimately. So, Wanchain CTO, he's the head of interoperability at the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. So we work a lot in kind of that industry group where there's a lot of peer review that goes on in terms of designing, not only cross-chain messaging, but cross-chain messaging as well. And so we try to make sure that our products will align with these standards that are being developed. Luckily, we're involved in informing them. So, as things change, we can adjust pretty quickly. But what it kind of ends up being is that, all these designs, we want to limit the number of components involved. So there's security and simplicity. And so that's kind of how we differentiate. A lot of these other Layer 0 is, relatively simple. It's I quite like them also. But these other ones, sometimes it's really quite convoluted what they're trying to pull off, very complex stuff. And that in itself, poses some security risks, because any one of those components, can have an issue. And so our approach is very, very simple for cross-chain messaging. What we end up doing is that Wanchain itself, we just deploy a single smart contract on the chains that we support. And we just call it a message gateway. So it basically is like a slingshot in a way. And the rest of it uses the same, bridge node group that our token bridges use. And then the projects that use this cross-chain messaging protocol, they themselves will deploy smart contracts on the source and destination chain. And we just teach them how to trigger these gateways. So when they, build whatever message they want in their smart contract, They send it to the gateway with some information like where do you want to send it to what chain, et cetera, et cetera. And then the gateway receives it. It goes through our bridge node group, the same one that does the token bridging, hands it over to the gateway on the destination chain, and it just flings it again, kind of unadulterated to the receiving smart contract that is owned by the project team. And then it triggers the on-chain logic based on the inputs. That made it sound extremely boring, but I'm telling you, it's cool stuff.
How do the nodes? How are they rewarded? How do they get rewarded for running nodes? How does that work?
Yeah, so we do have a coin called the Wanchain. It's both the coin of the Wanchain L1 blockchain, as well as serves to reward the bridge node groups. So yeah, every month the group of nodes gets reelected, and they're just earning Wanchain basically for performing their duties. They themselves have to stake a fair amount of Wanchain as well to be able to become a WAM bridge node, and this somewhat serves as kind of an additional security layer. So there's slashing mechanisms and things like that if there were to be any type of malfeasance or anything like that. But yeah, to answer you directly, the benefit for them comes from the Wanchain, and then very, very soon we will be rolling out our new bridge fee structure, and so these nodes will also benefit from the fees. One question
along, you were talking, and I might have missed it. I had a huge explosion in my neighborhood. That's how I got kicked off the network for a minute. But you were talking about, pools and transferring of value between chains based on like a pool mechanism, which got me thinking about like Thorchain. Is it similar to the mechanism that Thorchain uses for their kind of system, or is it quite different from that?
Yeah. First, I love Thor, so I'll throw that out there. But it is very, very different. So with Thorchain, they will basically actually be doing swaps most of the time. And so when you're doing extremely large transactions, you will experience slippage. They go through like an intermediary chain and do swaps in most cases. And you can, limit the slippage by, basically, I forget what they call this function, but where you basically DCA it, you set it out to like complete over the course of a whole day. So there's less price impact because there's actual swapping, like classic deck style LP swapping going on. With ours, it's not like that. These are all single asset pools, and the bridge nodes, as a user, let's say puts 1,000 USDT in on Ethereum, it'll just release 1,000 USDT on Avalanche. So there's not any swapping or kind of manipulation of the assets going on. It's just in on one pool and out on the other pool. So there's no like slippage. Slippage is not a concept in this or anything like that.
That's nice. Slippage is what dampens all traders, right?
Yes.
All meme coin traders, they lose all their money trying to trade Pepe and realize they lose a lot of that value through the slippage.
God forbid.
God forbid. So just kind of putting it into perspective in layman term, right? So the way that Wanchain works is you go to these different smart contract platforms, you deploy smart contract. This is essentially the terminal for how you interact with all these different chains. So if someone wants to use Wanchain, let's say on Optimism, and you guys are deployed there, they're just essentially interacting with the smart contract that you guys have deployed, which has all the logic and functionality with the entire on-chain ecosystem. Do I have that right to a degree?
Yeah, to a degree. For our kind of in-house products, it's like that. So like the bridge.wanchain.org, it's like that. The front end, all you're doing is interacting with the smart contract that we have deployed on the various networks that we support. With the cross-chain messaging, a little bit different because, the smart contracts that contain the actual logic are not deployed by us.
So, for example, you mentioned earlier that you've deployed on Cardano, which is a UTXO-based platform, although I do think it has smart contracts. How does the team go about trying to deploy on some of these chains that do not have smart contracts, things like Bitcoin and Litecoin and Dogecoin? I know I don't think any bridges, quote unquote bridges, have actually done this yet. Emblem does it for NFTs, but we do it with trading private keys. But to have more complex logic, right, you can't deploy a smart contract unless you're going to the L2s that do have it. At least at the current R&D level that you guys are at now, what is the approach to something like that?
Yeah, so if it's a true, no smart contract platforms, like you mentioned, Cardano actually has like smart contracts, so it doesn't apply in this case. But for Bitcoin, Litecoin, We also support Dogecoin. Basically, the way it is right now, it's just not feature full. So basically, you can take the BTC out of Bitcoin and bring it to another chain, but there's no situation where you're taking ETH from Ethereum and putting it on Bitcoin. So we simply just don't support that function. On the smart contract chains, this bridge node group, is triggering these smart contracts to lock and do all this type of stuff. On the non-smart contract chains, the cryptography is similar, but obviously there's no smart contracts. So really they are basically co-managing a lock account. So they have, all the BTC is getting locked on a address in Bitcoin. And then this private key that, can control this wallet is shared, so to speak, by the bridge node group. It's not a multi-sig. We use multi-party computation. So the private key is like sharded and then reassembled by the bridge node group. But yeah, so it's just that we don't support things that are impossible.
give me an idea, because this is all like kind of techie talk. Give me an idea of, like, besides taking BTC to Avalanche or something like that. Give me like a use case that just an average dude in the audience would understand. Like, oh, that, like, cross-chain messaging. We hear that, but it's like, well, what is that good for? Give me like some use cases you've seen which are, kind of interesting and people can start thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer that quite deeply. So cut me off if I start talking too long. But I will say you brought up like a really important point that I think about a lot, is that the actual use cases for this, we still need them to come. Right now, like DeFi is pretty cool. That was great for smart contracts, and it feels like in some ways we've hit a rut. We're still waiting for the next true killer app for blockchain in its current state. People like us at Wanchain, we think interoperability is going to be a key to unlocking that. But the actual use cases right now are kind of variations on a theme, whether you're using cross-chain messaging or not. If you look at the implementation, a lot of it is going to be still, value transfers, token transfers, just, built with a cross-chain messaging platform. And then there's like some variety based on that. Some things that exist now that people are playing with is, cross-chain lending, where, you can lock your collateral on one chain and then, send the confirmation of that lock, proof of that lock to another chain, and then you can borrow an asset on a different chain. Cool, but it's also, not quite, it doesn't fill you with, this feeling that we're going to change the world, like when DeFi first kind of popped off and it seemed like anything was possible. But what we're hoping to see is kind of really more, mature real world type of implementations and use cases. So one example that I like to point back to, because when blockchain was really starting to take off, everyone was going on and on about how supply chains are just like this perfect fit for blockchain, and blockchain is totally, every supply chain in the world is going to run on a blockchain in like 2 years. And then we fast forward eight years and no supply chain is being run on blockchain. Really, a couple wineries are tracking things, and that's about it. And I think part of that is because of this like lack of interoperability. So as we build out this infrastructure, what we hope to see is, like, if we take this supply chain example, is that you can have a kind of multiple chain system. So you could have, just for example, a first blockchain. This can be your supply blockchain, and this could even be permissioned. It's only kind of industry players who are specifically relevant to this supply chain that have access to this blockchain, and all the info related to the supply chain is recorded on this chain. Okay, that's number one. Then you have a second chain. Okay, if you're in the real world, some people might not like this, but you'll have to deal with the government. Now, no kind of company in their right mind is just going to be like, oh, here, take all of my data and give it to the government. This is why the one blockchain system kind of never took off, I think, for a supply chain. So you can have a regulatory blockchain. And now here you have the same supply. It's still permissioned, but you have the supply chain players who have access to it, as well as the government. Now, the supply chain companies, they only want to provide, the minimum amount of data that they have to in order to be compliant. So this second blockchain, the regulatory blockchain, will only have that information. It's like a subset of the information that's on the first chain. And then you could have like a third chain, which is for consumers. Some consumers want to know the provenance of their assets, for example. And so that's even kind of more narrow. And this one could be totally public because there's nothing private here. Everyone can see, it doesn't matter. And once you have this infrastructure, this interoperable infrastructure, okay, then in a proven, secure, decentralized way, that first supply chain blockchain can record data, the right data, the required data to the various chains. And now you have like a pretty mature multi-chain system where you could actually see it being used in the real world. But without the kind of that interoperability layer, we're probably limited still now to kind of DEX swaps and maybe like a pretty cool DCA tool or something like that, but still very much like stuck in the realm of trading digital assets.
Yeah, I wonder. It just you saying those sort of things reminds me of just like how siloed and we still are. People just I mean, especially talking about ordinals, and we've been very involved in the ordinals kind of explosion and just this mindset of like, no, everything's going to happen on Bitcoin, right? Or everything's going to happen on Solana, right? And it's just we're still very much locked into that. I don't know if it's just human nature to get kind of siloed or just like our lazy nature. I don't want to get an extra wallet. I don't have to figure out more stuff. Right.
Yeah. I mean, the wallets are a problem for sure. Once you leave an EVM, it's like you got to learn a whole new thing. And it's kind of a hot mess. Even learning one, for your regular non-blockchain user is already a big ask. And now you have to learn multiple. But yeah, like this idea of using one blockchain only, this was a while ago, so I might have the numbers slightly wrong. So don't quote me directly, but at least someone like me, I think a lot of people on this call, we do want to see a world that large swaths of the world are leveraging blockchain and are building on blockchain in some capacity. And there is this decentralization ethos in blockchain, but there's also this kind of empowerment ethos that was there from the start. And there's 8 billion people on Earth, and in a day there's like 86,000 plus seconds. But if we wanted to give like each if we want to give like each person on Earth even one transaction a day, you need like 90,000 plus TPS. It's like no one chain is going to be servicing that. So interoperability, if we really want kind of true mainstream adoption, we need multiple chains involved. And so interoperability is just a must. You have concerns about security, sure, and they're valid, but these are just things that need to be solved. The answer can't be, well, we just won't have interoperability, because then it's just this whole blockchain thing is not going to go anywhere. That's that 90,000 plus TPS, that's one transaction per day per person. I do like hundreds of transactions, needless, valueless transactions a day sometimes. We need even one a day is not enough. So just the scale of this thing, it's really immense. So yeah, interoperability just has to be part of the core infra.
Yeah, and I think it's it's just a reminder of how much needs to be built, right? Because it does have to, we talk about this like invisible layer, and it's so far from invisible right now. It's like you just bump up to it, and it takes devs and teams, weeks, months, years to build out stuff just to get stuff to work. So your average person, right, who just wants to use the internet and just wants to use Web3 and just wants it to all work, like it just feels like, this sort of conversation reminds me, holy cow, man, this might be still another 20 years away, right? It has that like early and it's like, it's a better version of Web 2, but it feels like it's a much harder version to build than Web 2. It's kind of the general to get it where it's, drop dead easy and I can use it easy on my phone. It just feels like we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I thought maybe this cycle was going to be different, but then on literally the first day of 2024, there was a huge bridge hack, and then ordinals took off, and then my Twitter feed was covered with memes again, and I was like, okay, I know what we're in for this time. It's going to be more of the same.
So Wanchain and Emblem came around the same time, at least the idea in 2016, and have seen the entire history of interoperability happen on chain. I believe the first atomic swap was in 2017. The first bridge hit mainnet around 2018, 2019. And So now we've discussed, up until this point, you and Adam are going back and forth of how early it still is. Tam, what do you think are the main challenges that for why we haven't seen native adoption in the crypto industry? I mean, yes, there's maybe 10 to 20 billion total TVL across all of the interoperability protocols, right? But that's like half of the market cap of Dogecoin itself, right? It's like nothing comparative to a $1.5 trillion industry. What is in your opinion, through the R&D of Wanchain, what is the number one hurdle that's preventing, I guess, crypto or mainstream adoption in the crypto industry itself?
Yeah, well, definitely, I think the number one missing thing that is stopping mainstream adoption is the interoperability side.
And what in the interoperability sector is the largest challenge right now?
Yeah, so the lack of industry standards. I think this is really what is needed right now. We can do a lot of stuff as we've been talking about off the top, but almost everything is still built ad hoc. So yeah, we can move anything you want, from one chain, just about from any chain to any chain, but it has to be a custom built solution. And that's no way to scale, and that's no way to have this seamless interoperable network. You need something that is more like imagine we go back a few years and the first DEX is coming out on Ethereum. Now, you could have a DEX and you could, if there's no ERC20 standard that everyone is following, sure, you could still integrate one by one all the different tokens that you want to be tradable on your DEX, but it's absolute insanity to try to build out a functional DEX that way. But then you have a standard that everyone is following, like ERC20. Okay, now you can just build your DEX to recognize that standard, and now all of a sudden it's this beautiful permissionless system. Anyone just puts any kind of a contract address they want, and you can just trade on the DEX. We don't have anything like that in the cross-chain sector. It's what we need. Basically every kind of project is talking about this. Everyone likes to talk about the TCP/IP of the Web3 world, but it's a far away from that. Part of it, I think, is there is a lot of mistrust in the industry. There's not that much, so to speak, that would have to be done, let's say, to start properly building and implementing various standards. But once you start using the same standard, you kind of open yourself up a little bit to risks from the other people that are using that standard. So right now, retail users, they see all these bridges getting hacked, and they're rightfully scared. Part of that exists in the builders as well. Like, oh well, we can't be minting the same wrapped asset and sharing a smart contract with multi-chain, because if multi-chain goes down, it's going to take us down with them. So there's this kind of element. It's totally off chain, but is definitely kind of slowing down a lot of the progress. But on the kind of more optimistic side of things, well, I think it's optimistic. I think some people will disagree because there's centralized entities involved. But some, like a company like Circle, is doing some cool stuff on the interoperability front. They have USDC themselves, and they have their in-house cross-chain protocol called CCTP. And this, it's basically like a cross-chain messaging bridge that burns and mints rather than locks and mints. And because they're Circle and they own the USDC contracts, you're actually minting the real USDC on the various chains. And I think we need these huge players. You talked about what I forget what number you said, but like 20 billion across all the interoperability protocols, something like that. But okay, that's similar to just Circle alone, for the USDC. So they can just come in and I'm hoping to see more kind of active participation from more of these big industry players that, throwing their hat into the interoperability ring as well. Because yes, we don't want to just copy paste CCTP and put it on everything, because there is these centralized components, but there is a lot to learn from it. And having just kind of the drive of these huge players, I think this is going to be the path forward to being able to actually eventually have an industry standard.
So to get a standard, you're talking about there's two different ways, at least, that I'm thinking about this. You mentioned in the very beginning that you're on the Ethereum Foundation representing, creating an industry standard for interoperability for Ethereum Foundation. Whereas, you just discussed Circle, which is, free market capitalism, them coming in, creating their own standard and getting market adoption. So do you think it's as simple as taking, this kind of, I guess you'd say, like, organizational standard adoption through heavy research and development? Or is it more likely that a private entity comes in and just basically dominates the market and then just gets adoption through product market fit?
Well, I hope it's not the second. I think what we want is a standard and not a product to power this interoperability. So if you do something like Chainlink CCIP, like this is a product. They have a lot of power and that's great. But I think ultimately what we want is that the actual infrastructure itself, this bridging, it should almost be like a zero profit condition thing. It's the core infrastructure itself, maximize security. Here's where the standards exist, and no one's really making money. No one's losing money because it has to continue to exist sustainably, but really kind of like a zero profit condition. Anyone can go in, easy to come in, easy to come out, and you have this infrastructure. Then on top of that, just because you obviously want to prioritize security if you're talking about core infrastructure, it doesn't mean that you can't build products on top of that are profit generating, that are maybe improving the experience. You have the security layer, but for example, maybe because it's so secure, maybe it's a little slower than some use cases might need. Okay, this is a perfect opportunity for a product here. That company or that product is going to assume some of the risk, help you complete this transaction quicker for a fee than if anything goes wrong in the underlying thing that's assumed by that product. I think this is kind of how we want to build it out. But that core layer, that base layer, can't be a product. It has to really be core infrastructure.
The way that the industry's morphed over the last 15 years, though, unfortunately, I find it hard that it's going to be this organizational standard that gets implemented, because the way crypto works, it's such a free market and all the activity happens on chain and also in a pseudonymous or completely anonymous manner. It's a different type of paradigm that's getting a bunch of these ideas or protocols to get adoption, right? The degree of coordination required to reach social consensus across 30 to 50 main blockchains is tough. It would take a real strong leader to really enact this, right? You would need Vitalik to really take charge in this, and maybe a handful of other key leaders to see that happen. But at the end of the day, right, even Vitalik can be overthrown by somebody like BlackRock coming in and saying, hey, this is my interoperability protocol, and we're just going to take it to market and just pretty much dominate everybody. But it's an interesting thing to think about over time, because there's three different ways to move assets across blockchains. But that's just assets. As you message with the messaging protocol, it could be any type of data, right? So there's so many degrees to it, and it's not even completely understood by everybody to see where we actually might go.
Yeah, but I think it'd be a shame if where we landed was just BlackRock coming in, like you said, and saying this is now how we do interoperability. And they have
Onyx too, right? They've already put their foot into the game, and basically in their own centralized way, they're already in the market.
Yeah, they seem better suited for being kind of that product layer, built on top of it. There's obviously, when you do things in a decentralized way like this, one of the trade-offs is that it can be quite slow and difficult to coordinate. But there's still, it's still happening in the background. It's not like we're at a complete standstill and there's not any progress being made. There's even EIPs focused directly on this, being reviewed. This would kind of be more that kind of grassroots approach to try to get like a standard. And yeah, it's not going to be, immediately 50 chains, but if you get Ethereum, for example, to formalize an EIP that's based on a cross-chain messaging interface, then that has the potential to radiate outwards. You're probably going to get the L2s at that point, then you're going to get the side chains, and now you have like a pretty big cluster. And then even besides from that, I guess maybe we're showing our colors a little bit, but there are other this type of like grassroots approach to it. Like you have Cosmos with IBC, who are building out their own kind of little sector. Same thing with Polkadot, who have kind of in-house solution between the pair chains and the relay chain. So there's stuff happening, but just the fact that we can name off like now 4 different ongoing approaches to industry standards kind of shows that it's still going to be a while until we have one.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It's like you could have whatever Ethereum lead, but what are the odds that Solana's going to accept it, right? I mean, it seems like the existing power structures kind of between blockchains are so strong, this kind of silo effect.
Mm-hmm.
It almost feels like an impossibility to me. But you're probably more on the ground, so you don't get that feel. You get that feel that there actually is the potential there for coordination.
I think that this is why I personally am encouraged by someone like Circle coming in and really putting, their muscle behind an approach to interoperability. They're the type of project that is a major player in all these different ecosystems that we talked about. They could be an example of an entity that might have influence in both a Solana and an Ethereum, for example, and definitely not just take CCTP as it exists now, but it is just the cross-chain messaging implementation. So there are kind of things that can be learned there. The centralized component there, it's permissionless, but the centralized component is that there's like a Circle side attestation. So it's kind of like two steps. The first step is anyone can trigger the cross-chain transaction to burn and lock, and then that verification. This is centralized, but it's at least a starting point to kind of think about how to make these totally siloed communities and networks interoperable. I would stop short of saying it's impossible, but it's a huge task for sure. But I guess the way I kind of interpret it is that it's a necessity. If this problem does not get solved, there's not going to be a true widespread adoption.
We were having this conversation with one of our friends in the ordinal space. He thinks the future of crypto is actually just complete native experiences with no interoperability, whereas I think the opposite. And so like the reference or kind of the example I gave him is, so you think crypto is just going to be these like siloed games, right? Just like how video games are now, they're siloed into their own consoles. You can't take them anywhere else. And he said, yeah, I don't think there's going to be pretty much interoperability across the board. So we're both here on the same adventure that we believe, is a complete necessity. One kind of framework I like to use that relates to the real world is blockchains, or I see blockchains as countries, right? And then you see dApps and L2s as kind of the cities and towns that exist in these countries. And then the 3 different types of interoperability protocols are the ways to move the assets, whether it's, a shipping container or, a plane, or however you move these different types of assets in the real world, transportation. And the international shipping industry is, I think, 5 to 10% of the global GDP, right? So if you're taking the global GDP that's in the, 50 to $100 trillion, even 1% of that is a $1 trillion industry, which makes it just so immensely large that it's a huge necessity. I think it'll be much larger. Actually, it'd be 10 trillion because if it was 10%. But as we wrap up here, like, what are some things for us to look forward to for Wanchain? Like, what is the focus right now in the purview of saying, hey, we need to get this done, and these are some of the innovative products or ideas that we're going to bring to market soon?
Sure. Yeah. So in 2024, definitely we are going to continue to roll out our cross-chain message passing protocol and expand it to non-EVMs as well. So for example, we're going to roll it out to Cardano. So this is going to be a big differentiator for Wanchain because we do have this pre-existing focus on non-EVM. So we're going to continue to roll out our products there. Other ones in the pipeline, include like Solana and things like that. So providing this type of interoperable layer. And this, maybe I'll speak more directly to the Wanchain community now. One thing, that they have been, anticipating is kind of a better unification of the various components that form Wanchain, the multiple cross-chain products, the L1, and kind of make this more of a unified system in itself. So that's a big focus for 2024. First and foremost, it's going to happen via, the launch of our bridge fees. So all these fees will be, converted to Wanchain to be able to provide value for the ecosystem and reinvest it into the ecosystem. So that'll be kind of something that our existing community will look forward to. And then besides that, definitely you're going to see Xflow's expansion continue to take off. We're at all-time highs right now for Wanchain standards, mostly driven by Xflows. So we have a lot of more L2s and sidechains kind of in the pipeline to expand this product. And then the rest of that is probably going to be behind the scenes. We're going to keep hammering away with our industry partners as well as the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance to kind of just keep going after this industry standard and try to make just a few steps forward in 2024.
That's exciting. One final question about the fee model. We have this conversation in the Emblem team chat a lot about different business models for interoperability protocols and how it's quite limited at the moment. What is the fee model? Is it you're charging for bridging and bridging both ways in a percentage, like a 0.3% or something like that? Or is it a different model?
So the fees are split into two. So we have a network fee, will have a network fee and a service fee. So network fee, this is dynamic and will just cover the kind of incurred on-chain cost. Because the user only signs the transaction on one chain. So on the destination chain, that'll get kind of reimbursed. And then the service fee is a small percentage of the cross-chain volume. It's smaller than 0.3%. I won't say the number right now, just in case we change it right before launch. But it's very, very small. Our goal is still to be the cheapest cross-chain protocol, so that we can maintain volume via kind of the aggregators and things like that. And then Wanchain holders themselves will be able to benefit from like a discount on that based on how much WAN they have.
Love it. Bringing the tokenomics on top of the traditional fee model.
Yes, onto the product layer.
Yeah, right. Product layer. I guess that's what we should title this, right? Is it going to be the protocol or the products that win in the interoperability wars that are coming over the next, probably 2 decades until it really gets figured out? Dude, really appreciate this conversation. It's very educational and enlightening to also just talk to somebody that's in the industry that actually, it to a much deeper level than I do as well. But up and down, you've seen it all. So really appreciate your time, man.
No, thanks a lot for having me. I had a blast. I love talking about this stuff. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
I can feel it. For those that don't know, Adam, myself, and Chris, we host this show Tuesday through Thursday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. Please make sure that you follow Tam. Make sure that you follow Emblem Vault and everyone on stage so that you can get the most up-to-date information about crypto interoperability. Tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time, we'll be back with the founder of Atomicals talking about how they are building an AVM, Atomicals virtual machine, on Bitcoin Layer 1. I'm really excited for that. And until then, guys, we will see you tomorrow morning. Make sure that you stay safe, and we'll see you soon.